Hey y'all, welcome back to New Slang. I'm your host, music journalist Thomas Mooney. This is episode 166, where I am joined by my good friend, Charley Crockett. This is like the third time Charley's been on New Slang. It's always been a great time talking with Charley. This time around, we talk about his newest album, 10 for Slim, Charley Crockett Sings James' Hand, which came out this past Friday. Which, also, if you go over to Holler, you can read an accompanying interview with Charley that I did as well. It's a great place for some great journalism right now happening over at Holler. Super easy URL to remember. It's holler.country. And I have a few other great pieces coming out in the coming weeks. Super excited about those. Anyway, this new one with Charley is a tribute record to the late, great hill country honky-tonk country singer, James Slim Hand. As you'd expect, Charley does them justice, especially that final song, the previously unreleased song, Slim's Lament. It's just an incredible song that was written by James right before he passed. Charley tells a story about how he was sent an iPhone recorded version of that song by James, and it was previously just an unnamed song. It was like the recording number from the phone. So Charley and company, they aptly titled that song Slim's Lament. And while the entire record is just a stellar collection of some of James's best work and his most iconic tunes, for me, Slim's Lament, it just cuts a little bit deeper because of that side story, and also it's just like an incredible song. I encourage you all to go check out 10 for Slim and go order yourself a copy over on charleycrockett.com. Today's presenting partner is our pals over at Desert Door Texas Sotol. If you're asking yourself what exactly Desert Door or a Sotol is, well, it's a premium, high-quality spirit that is similar to a tequila or a mezcal, but in my estimation, it's more refined, smooth, and fragrant. It has a distinct and intriguing palate that picks up on hints of vanilla and citrus while maintaining a healthy earthiness that is quite enjoyable. One of my favorite features about Desert Door is just how versatile it really is. If you want to feel fancy and a little highbrow, it's perfect for a variety of cocktails that call for lime wedges and coarse salt, chopped ginger, agave nectar, sprigs of thyme and sticks of cinnamon. If you're down to muddle some fresh fruit, all that kind of stuff, it's perfect. It's great for experimentation and fine-tuning all of your mixologist skills. And then also, if you're a little bit more down home and casual, you got that denim jacket on. It's just perfect for those short and sweet, simple go-to favorites that hit the mark every time. I'm talking about ranch waters and Moscow mules and palomas and Mexican Coca-Cola with Desert Door. What I love so much about Desert Door is just how genuine and authentically West Texan they are as well. They go out and harvest Sotol plants out in the wild and are aware and knowledgeable conservationists at heart. So next time you're at your neighborhood liquor store, get yourself a bottle of Desert Door. I'll throw a link into the show notes for more information. All right, before we get started, just a couple of notes. If this is your first time listening to New Slang, do the obvious. Hit that subscribe button. Tell all your friends and family and co-workers and just anyone you think who will enjoy the podcast. 2, go check out the Patreon if you haven't. It's a great way to support this podcast and support journalism in general. A lot of really cool perks that I have on there as well. 3, if you're into 90s country music, go check out my other podcast called The Neon Eon. I've had folks like Clay Walker, Pam Tillis, Clint Black on, and this week's guest was Sarah Evans. That's a really, really great conversation right there. Be sure to go check that out. While you're at it, go check out the merch store. I've added some new items on there, a lot of drinkware and some new Bust the Hub t-shirts. We've got coffee mugs and even shot glasses available. So check those out. Go buy one. We'll make this one super short and I'll quit rambling on here. Here is Charley Crockett. So let's just start out with the obvious here. James was one of these songwriters here in Texas who was really just like a staple of the hill country, honky-tonks and bars. And, let's just kind of start with that obvious question. Do you remember the first time you met James or saw him playing?
Yeah, I think the very first time I saw him play, I think was the Midnight. I've seen him in a lot of different places, and it kind of was over the course of years that I actually got to know him. But I think the first time I saw him play was Midnight at the White Horse, probably in 2013. And then right around that same time, I really don't remember which time was first, was up at Jenny's, Little Longhorn. I remember seeing him there, but the first time I ever heard about him was at the All Good Cafe in Deep Ellum up in Dallas. There were a couple of like posters of his up on the wall. And so I think that stuff must have been from around whenever he cut that first Rounder record, or late 90s, early 2000s, you know. And I remember seeing photos of him on the wall, and, you know, I was like, who is this guy that's, you know, hunched over with his knees bent, you know, looking like Hank Williams, is what I kept thinking when I would see this picture and we would go up there to the All Good. And that was a long time ago for me. I mean, long time ago for some people. I mean, obviously a lot of people that were older remember him playing all around the hill country in the 90s, you know? Yeah. And, but for me, I think it was 2008, the first time I saw him, pictures of him, 2007, 2008, something like that. And, you know, there was like a quote on one of those posters that said, "The real deal, Willie Nelson." You know? Yeah. And I'm like, what? I mean, you know, Willie Nelson's calling him the real deal. He looks like Hank Williams, you know. Mike's got his picture up on the wall at All Good. You know, that says a lot right there. A dude that owns All Good, it's a lot, you know. And, you know, there's all this memorabilia, Texas history all over the walls. It's All Good. For him to be on there is a big deal. And anyway, that's how I first started thinking about him. And then, you know, I think then I didn't go back. I didn't see Dallas, the city of Dallas. I didn't go back through there for years because I was hoboing, you know, hitchhiking and doing the street thing. And when I first saw him play at the White Horse, even at Jenny's, I don't think I quite put it together. I don't think I quite even realized. You know, I think when I first saw him play at the Horse, I didn't even realize that it was the same guy at first. You know, It was more like that was the first place I ever saw Brendan Lee play too. It was the same year, and they had similar effects on me in different ways. Where, you know, I was sitting in the back of that place and, you know, saw James play, and I think I saw Brennan and Noel and them playing on a different night, but she used to also play the midnight spot. I don't know if you remember that, but it was this thing where, you know, and I was looking around and I'm like, you know, looking at people and I'm like, am I the only one in here that can't believe this guy is in here? You know, and I kind of looked around and I thought, I think I am the only one that thinks that. You know, because people were so used to him. You know, they're either, you know, he had that thing. You know, even when I first started like recording over at Billy Horton's on Wildwood, you know, I'd bring him up, you know, and all the, you know, I've been very fortunate over the years to really draw in a lot of the, you know, what I'd call the Texas, you know, A-team for country music into my sessions over the years. And that's had a lot to do with Billy Horton and Jay Moeller, you know, and just what I think always is that Texas and more centered around Austin, Texas is the best of true country music in the world. And I can run that against, you know, spending time in Nashville and New Orleans and, you know, all around this country and the world. And so those guys have come around, you know, Nathan Fleming and Dave Biller and a lot of these guys, Cullen Fox and T. Jared Bonner and just Jason Roberts, all these great guys. And there's so many of them. But, you know, whenever I bring up James, somebody always had some, you know, story about something gone wrong with him and, you know, some kind of escapade or fiasco with him. And I would always kind of bring him up and, you know, people tell me how, you know, he either wouldn't show up on the gig or he was out of it or all kind of stuff. And just tell me some kind of story about the bad experience they had, you know, and they walk out of the room and Jay Moeller would be standing there with me and he knew how much I really loved James. And he looked over and he goes, man, James is my favorite too, you know, you know, and that's how it kind of was with him, Thomas. But the thing is, you know, I don't think he recorded. I think that first recording of his, it was like 1997 or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was, or sorry, I forget what year, but I think he was 47 from what I understand when he recorded his first, you know, like kind of real album. Now, think about somebody like, you know, Johnny Paycheck or Waylon Jennings or somebody like that not being recorded till they were 47 years old, you know?
Right.
I mean, you could argue those guys were already washed up and done, you know,
mm-hmm.
by 47 years old with how hard they had lived. You know, James had a pretty good output from 47 to 68. If you ask me, and had he started recording at 27, I really do think the count might be different with him. You know, and I've thought a lot about that, you know, because I ended up playing with James quite a bit. You know, he played with us in Dallas at the Kessler Theater when it was my first show back from my heart surgeries in 2019. And then we played Green Hall together, which is one of my best memories. And I'm very grateful that I had that opportunity to do that show with him there because he was so good at Hurt, man. He really was. And he got up with us and that's how I got to Memphis, which we had this thing because I had been up for an Ameripolitan Award a couple years prior to that and was in Memphis on Beale Street at Blue City for one of Dale's showcases. And it was packed like sardines in there and all these cowboy hats and, you know, that whole Ameripolitan crowd. But James got up with the band somewhere near the end of the night and, you know, he started doing, that's how I got to Memphis, which I mean, I knew the song kind of, you know, but I hadn't given it much thought. You know, sometimes it's not the song as much as it's who's delivering it to you when you realize what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And, man, he started singing that song and right as he sang it, it just hit me like a Mack truck, man. And, you know, he was like that, man. He always, I mean, not to say it this way, but you know, he could make the whole night of singers seem like amateurs, you know?
Yeah.
Once he got up and you really realize that once he'd get up, that's how good he was. You know, sometimes he was off, but he usually wasn't, honestly. You know, he really wasn't, you know, he might be crying and he might, you know, be difficult to understand what he's even talking about off the stage, you know, cause he's been drinking all day. or whatever, but he was rarely off from the 100 times I saw his ass sing. You know, he was always really good. And he just must have known he had everybody, because there we are in Memphis. You got all these people trying to sing, you know, country songs, and most of it really sounded like, you know, people trying to imitate, you know, a sound. And James gets up there without a guitar, swaying around the stage, you know, with his hand out in front of him, and he's singing "That's How I Got to Memphis," and it's just, I mean, I've said it so many times, man, and I saw him do that after he won the Ameripolitan Award, maybe the year or two before, when it was down in Austin still at the Paramount Theater, and I snuck in, you know, and I was all scared, you know, that I was going to get caught, you know, as an imposter, wasn't supposed to be there, you know, but James was actually standing in the lobby in that suit that he'd always wear, that oversized white suit with red trim. And he must have known I was afraid to be there when I walked in, and he just was standing there damn near all by himself in the foyer, and he just started talking to me like he'd known me forever, and I don't think he recognized me at all. And this was probably 2015 or 2016 or something. But that night he actually won that award. Charley Pride and Wanda Jackson sang that night. By the way, Charley Pride came out and sounded identical to his records that night. I had no idea he was going to be there. I didn't know who, you know, I didn't know anything. Like I said, I wasn't invited to be there. But, and then James actually won the honky-tonk award. And then everybody went to the Continental Club after, and he got up with the band. And I remember he sang Lesson in Depression and In the Corner. I can't remember what else he sang, but I remember those two. And that particular night, I remember being like, this is the greatest country performer and singer on the planet, without question. You know, I remember thinking that night. In fact, I was so excited about how good he was that night. There was a guy, this kid was on stage playing fiddle with him. He must have been 120 pounds and like 6'2". And I just hired that guy on the spot to come play on my honky-tonk Jubilee record, purely for the fact how excited I was, you know, about James. And that kid just happened to be on stage, and it turned out that not only did he not know James, I don't think he really had a lot of experience playing honky-tonk fiddle. But he did end up playing on the honky-tonk Jubilee record. And yeah, that's what happened. That's how I got in, kind of really got in with James's world and started listening to his records. I think I remember being surprised by how many records of his I could find on YouTube, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You mentioned obviously like you hearing him do that Tom T. Hall song, That's How I Got to Memphis, and how, you know, like that performance blew you away and everything. And you guys ended up doing that music video with him featured in it. How did that get, I guess, started?
Yeah. Oh, well, he sang that song. He sang That's How I Got to Memphis that night on stage. And I was actually up for that same award that he was up for maybe the previous year. I didn't win it, but I was staying at Graceland. I think it was the first year they moved it to Memphis. And I went back to the hotel, and I stayed up all night learning that song because of him. And I just, being in Memphis and what he was touching in on, to me, you know, a Tom T. Hall song, but the way that he made you feel the story that song is telling, it just affected me, you know. And that's why I say, I mean, I was always playing country music on the street, you know, mixed in with everything else that I was getting exposed to. But James' hand really, more than any other individual, really turned me more in the direction of like kind of squarely embracing the label of being called country. you know, that I was kind of, you know, getting pressed into.
Mm-hmm.
It really was because of James, you know.
Yeah.
You know, more than anything else, you know.
This episode is brought to you by Wild Gallery. Based in Austin, Texas, Wild Gallery is Austin's only art gallery featuring Native American art. Head on over to wyld.gallery to see their vast array of traditional and contemporary art by Native American artists. Currently, they are a virtual gallery. You can still make appointments on their website if you're wanting to purchase a specific painting in person. But of course, the beauty of them being virtual is that you're able to see and buy from your home without trekking all the way to Austin. While New Slang definitely focuses on music, I always love speaking with songwriters about those other mediums that they explore. Often that's through painting and drawing, the visual arts. And since I'm a West Texas native, I've long been drawn to the history, the stories, traditions, and heritage of Native Americans, especially those that were out here in the Western frontier. And that is what's so great about Wild Gallery. All of the artists featured are Native American, and they are telling stories about Native Americans. If you scroll through their collection, you'll see a wide range of styles as well. There's definitely some American West and some bold pop art. There's more of that traditional fine art like oil on canvas, as well as those that are influenced by Native American traditions. My parents, they always had paintings hanging around the house or their offices that were inspired by West Texas and Native Americans. And now I do as well, especially here in my office, which I'll let you guess where the latest print is from. As a journalist, I do feel like the most intimidating part is staring at a blank white page. And of course, you don't have to be a journalist to be staring at a white blank page. I know a lot of y'all do that. What I'm saying though is don't let your walls suffer from that same white blandness. Go visit Wild Gallery. I guarantee you will find something that moves you and that you'll want hanging in your home. Again, that's Wild with a Y. Go visit wyld.gallery. Links will be in the show notes as well. Okay, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, you mentioned that Willie Nelson quote, you know, the real deal. And obviously, like, he had his notable champions of people telling, hey, you need to check him out and all that kind of stuff. But as you've also mentioned, you know, when you were talking about seeing him at midnight and you kind of looking around and going like, oh, no one realizes how great and incredible this is. A lot of his career was like that, as far as those same weekly tour or weekly gigs and, you know, playing in front of small crowds. And you've already mentioned how, like, he didn't even get an official, you know, studio record until his 40s. And, you know, to me, all of that kind of shows like the testament of like him focusing in on the songwriting and like just kind of having that consistency of that focus. Obviously, you know, you've mentioned how in your career you've played subways and street corners and in front of people who you had to like grab their attention, and it wasn't you started recording your records a little bit later as well, not 47, but you know, a little bit later. Did you I guess like did you ever look back and like realize, like, you know, I guess like seeing him and seeing how he didn't necessarily like quit early on or anything like that. Did you always have to kind of like, did you ever look at him as like an example of like realizing that sometimes that path is the path to go down, the consistency of like playing and the focus on the songs?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of why somebody like James, like that's what I was talking about, you know, a lot of these, there's a million stories about how wild and, rough around the edges that James was, you know, running around, you know, and that's why I would bring up anybody, even Willie Nelson. I mean, those guys were wild, man, you know. I don't think people nowadays really understand, like what those guys' lives were like in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Some of them, unfortunately, even in the 80s, you know, what they're really, just really how hard they were living. So, and I think that part of that is because it's changed so much. It's, now it's put together. Now it's like you can get people together, usually who have money, and they create a narrative that's not real and then sell that, and that in a lot of ways that's not new. I mean, those guys there was a lot of that happening in commercial country music and blues music all the way back to the 30s. There's your Robert Johnsons, and then there's like 100 people like them that the labels were trying to sell. But somebody like James is an example of that era where, well, let's go back to Willie, man. Willie was born in Abbott, Texas, James is from right there in the town of West Texas. I mean, they're just a few exits apart. Willie started playing in bands in front of live audiences at 11, 12, 13. James started playing in bands in front of people at 13. James drove trucks. James worked horses, off and on. I mean, God, you sit down with him at those shows and he'd just tell all these stories about, driving these freight liners down to, Louisiana and back and gambling out behind these, gas stations and stuff, I mean, he would tell stories like that. I can actually think of this, what he was talking about running these these midnight runs, like he's saying about in the song and all this type of stuff and really living that way and playing the bars, because I think James really was just about the music and was about writing country music because, on the record that we recorded, Thomas, sorry, I'm eating breakfast. The last song that we recorded of his music was this song that he sent me. He was demoing out songs on his iPhone. He sent me 2 or 3 not long before he died. And he had this song about, I think the song, we ended up calling it Slim's Lament because it didn't have a title. He just sent it, as a recording, and it just had the numbers on there if you just record it without titling it. And it was about, basically the tagline was, I'm praying to God, but I'm calling for you. And it's this whole song where he's like, I swear that I've tried everything but suicide. Oh, death, you'll have so little left to claim. I'm not singing too good, but it was this crazy song, man, that we ended up adding on to the record because, I had kept promising him that I was not promising him. He didn't need to promise him anything, but I kept threatening to record his songs, and like last year he was going to come. I kept asking him to come on the road with the guys, come on the bus, and, let the guys back him up on, and get in front of these country audiences, that we built up, mostly thanks to, Turnpike Troubadours and John Folk at Red 11. I built this organic following in that independent country world, and our audiences were really loving James, and in a lot of ways, he should have been the person playing, last. And so we were trying to convince him to come on the road with us. He wasn't sure, it's 67, 68. And he thought about it for a long time. And then he finally decided that he said, I think I'm ready to do this, give this another shot, go out there and get in front of young people, which is part of what was so exciting about watching him play with his band, but at the shows with us, was seeing how excited our audience was, that some of them, obviously, Thomas knew who he was, and were already fans. And then there were a lot of young people that had never seen him before, and that was really, really amazing to watch, because I saw people, respond to him in the way that I did, and if they liked what I was doing as far as country music, I knew they were going to like what James was doing. And then, of course, COVID hit, and actually, incidentally, the last live show I saw was James. Now I think about this, it was James at the White Horse right before the horse closed for the year. Last year it was James playing the midnight show. In fact, that he tried to give me his pay that night because I was out of work. I said, James, I think I'm all right, man. I think you should have this. And then I think he bought me a drink or something. But I think, what I'm talking about, like with Willie and them and James, is like, and how I relate to that is, I don't think I recorded my first record until I was 30 or something, but I had been playing in front of people since my late teens, which, there's a lot of people in this business that are doing well for themselves and have audiences, and they deserve them. But a lot of these people, it's like they're recording, maybe they're playing solo, in some regional area for a few years, and then somebody discovers them and they put out a record. And that one record, got these people being called the second coming of Hank Williams, and I see that happening a lot. And I'm in no way saying that those people aren't deserving of their audiences, but that just doesn't have anything to do with the way that, that I got here, or what James Ham was doing, or Willie Nelson for that matter. It's just, I don't think people realize that Willie was still playing. Did you see that photo that they posted in the Country Music Hall of Fame of Willie Nelson standing there with James White in '67 at the Spoke?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Well, that wasn't a publicity piece. That's where he was playing in 1967. He wasn't selling tickets, man. Not outside of Texas, he wasn't. And even in Texas, it was more of a cult dedicated following. And I mean, he'd already written all these hits. I mean, we're talking about 67. I mean, he really, he'd been with Tree Publishing. He had many hits, from Patsy Cline to the Ray Price stuff. I mean, he'd written Family Bible. I mean, he'd done all these things, but he was still playing. He was playing at the Spoke,
Right.
So I think James was a lot more in that tradition. People said that about me too, in some ways, where it's like, when I put out Welcome to Hard Times, I've got people that are like, man, if Charlie would have put if this record out, if this was in the 60s or 70s, all these people would be fighting to have the right to push this record in the top of these country and pop charts. But it's 2020, 2021, and it's a different era. It really is very different. It's it's a very different place, but I don't think that means that there's not room for the James Hand types. I think it's different than that. I think it's more like very few people exist that can do what James was doing with that type of authenticity. And, there's an audience for you, even if it is, like what Alan Jackson or one of those guys said, you play country music, you might not have the big audience that we had, but you got to do it, and somebody's got to do it. And, James was doing that, and it affected me and a lot of people like me. Jake Penrod is another example of that. Somebody that I know knew James well, and they were close friends. And I've watched Jake go. I mean, he was always good, but if you see where Jake Penrod's at now and how much better he's gotten and how authentic and genuine his sound is, his guitar playing, his songwriting, his singing. You know, that he's a clear example of how somebody like James Hand, you know, is causing a young man, you know, to do it his way. And, you know, that keeps that type of American kind of Texas, unique Texas country sound, roots sound of Texas blues. I mean, James was very much a bluesier country singer. I'm sure you'd agree with that. You know, it's like Hank Williams, you know, really, really a very blues based country singer, you know. And so
this episode of New Slang is brought to you by the Blue Light Live here in Lubbock, Texas. Blue Light has undoubtedly been my home away from home over the years and has played such a vital role, not only for my development as a journalist, but obviously it's been one of the foundational pieces for a lot of your favorite songwriters and bands who have made it out of the Lubbock area over the years. And of course, as a music venue, they've played such a pivotal role for a lot of your favorite bands just in general. One of my favorite parts about Blue Light is just how versatile the place can truly be. I've seen it crowded and rowdy on a Saturday night for a rock and roll band, and I've seen it dead still on a Wednesday when a legendary singer-songwriter rolls through town. What you should do is go over to bluelightlubbock.com and check out all the new merch they've added. Hats, t-shirts, both short and long sleeve. They also have hoodies and koozies and just added some sweatshirts that are very much an homage to the college sweatshirt that John Belushi wore in Animal House. And then, of course, maybe the crown jewel of their new merch is the Varsity Club style jacket in blue satin. I got one the other day, and yeah, it's just one of my favorite things I own now. And yeah, I don't know, I just love it. Anyway, you can check out all of their new merch over at bluelightlubbock.com. As always, I'll throw a link into the show notes for easy access. Okay, let's get back to the show.
You know,
well, you feel you instantly kind of feel that gravity and like the weight of those songs. And a lot of that comes with that, you know, like the Hank Williams, like the high lonesome drawl, right? And the, again, like that gravity of what he's singing about, that heartache and the, that restlessness. I think restlessness is really connected to the blues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is restlessness. You know, when I told you that I kept threatening to record his songs, he'd like look around, you know, do that thing you did where you look around like there's always something about to happen or something's wrong. You know, he'd like scan the room and he'd look back over at you and like get over in your ear and he'd go, well, pal, I sure wish you would, you know, and then he'd turn around and look, you know, and whatever he's doing, that's kind of how he talked. And I meant to record that stuff when I just didn't expect him to die so suddenly, you know?
Right.
I don't think anybody expected him to die like he did, as quick as he did. I don't know the circumstances really. You'd have to talk to Miss Kayla or, you know, some of the people really close to him, you know, family. But I think, you know, the complications of COVID in 2020, you know, the way the hospitals were being run and all that, you know, it seemed like, I don't know, you know, I mean, obviously I don't think anybody would claim that James is taking good care of himself, but, you know, I don't know, you know, I'm not sure he might've been around a couple more years, you know, if not for circumstances, but, you know, I remember I was in California and we were recording these videos for Welcome to Hard Times, you know, when we found out that he'd passed. I think Busty from the Horse was the one that texted me, or Gabriel, I can't remember. And I just cried about it, you know, and I just immediately thought about, you know, that I'd promised him that I was going to, you know, record the songs, and thought, man, you know, just the way that he was viewed, you know, as this, I just always thought he was so undervalued, you know. Mm-hmm. Really, you know, in every way, you know. It's not to say that he didn't get all kind of opportunities, chances, and all kind of stuff. I'm not saying that. Just in general, you know, with a guy like that, you know, it takes, it takes somebody recording their songs sometimes, I think, and I had always wanted to do that. And so when he passed, I just thought, man, I want to do it now, like I want to get this stuff recorded and get it out in front of people, so that it's not one of these things where it's like James's name is like fading and he's another one of these, these Central Texas, bar type, country singers. And so, I called up Billy Horton and said, this is what I wanted to do. And we got Jay Moeller and the guys together. And then, I was able to look through his catalog and really play what I wanted to play. Like, what I felt of his stuff that really, reached me. And in doing that, a couple things happened. Number one, I looked at his catalog as I really absorbed it and decided what I wanted to put on the album. And you can realize how great he was and how much, in a way, I just could relate to him in so many ways, because if you listen, hey, did they send you the record that I recorded? Have you heard it, Thomas?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so it's like, if you listen, nobody I think has ever taken his whole catalog and cut it down into 10 songs. Right. And if you go through those songs, you can see a man that like wrote as well as Hank Williams in 1950. You can hear those songs like Mighty Lonesome Man or something like that. I mean, Hank Williams would have, if he'd have lived a little longer, he probably would have written that song. I mean, that's how good it is, in my opinion. So, So Did I is like something you'd hear out of a Johnny Paycheck Little Darling era. I mean, and they said that about Paycheck too, said Paycheck would have been one of the top 3 country songwriters in all of country music history had he only cared more to be that, and then you go from those songs that James touched in on to the reason that like we included Lesson in Depression and Midnight Run on the album was because I heard it when he did it live on stage in the bars, and I heard it listening to his studio recordings and when we cut it at Billy's. And I thought with this, with this prime country, this return to 90s country thing that they're trying to touch in on in the major label world, with that throwback kind of, George Strait, Randy Travis sound, Gary Stewart sound, Midnight Run and Lesson in Depression, if you ask me, are as good as any song on country music radio in terms of the song itself, what country music is, what storytelling in country music is, and the timelessness of it, which is why we put those on there, and I just wanted people to see that. And I hadn't even given it too much thought, except when we look back at it, I thought, man, you can look at James's catalog and really see, in my opinion, you can see everybody, you can see like he is one of those great code generators, or like, this kind of country music genius that, because he did live in our times, and made it to 2020, he has that thing where like he can authentically be Hank Williams in delivery, and he can authentically prove to you that he can write and sing like Gary Stewart. I mean, I'm preaching here, but I mean, I've seen everybody, man. I've seen everybody, and there's a lot of talent out there, but there is really only one James Hand, and it's like, you can hear Willie Nelson in him. You can hear George Jones. You can hear Stonewall Jackson, Wynn Stewart, all of these people. When you hear a lot of those greats, I hear a little bit of James' voice when I hear them sing, but not in a way that like, it's like he's copying them, in a way that like he, as who he was, being from the town of West Texas, and the way that he lived his life largely in Texas, almost entirely, almost like a Lightning Hopkins type, we're lucky to have a guy like that, and that's why I've said it a million times, and I'm going to always say it when people talk to me about James, or if I bring him up, it's like, obviously I'm too young to have met George Jones or shook hands with Hank Williams. You know, I haven't even met Willie. You know, I had thought I was going to meet him last year. Had 3 or 4 festivals with him, including his 4th of July picnic, but with COVID and stuff, I never got a chance to meet him. And so I say all that saying, you know, I never met any of those guys, but I did know James Hand. And in that way, I've touched hands with truly the greatest. And that's how I feel about him, you know? And I think anybody that really knew what James was doing, really had been affected by him singing on stage, you know, I think I would agree with that.
Yeah, like they, as you mentioned, like you can hear him in like the Stonewall Jacksons, and you can hear him in like the Paychecks. What it is like they tapped into the same feelings, the same stories, and all that is like rooted in being genuine as a songwriter and in storytelling. And you know, it's one of those things where sometimes like the honky-tonk in this town is the exact same honky-tonk in another town, even if like you've never been, you know what I'm saying? Have you been to like these places where you've stepped right in, never been there before, but you know the stories that have happened there, and you just feel like,
man, Thomas, speaking of that, you know what song of his I think is one of the greatest like bar room classic country songs ever written in America is James's Over There, That's Frank. That song is right there with anything Willie Nelson or Johnny Bush or Paycheck or George Jones, anything they ever wrote or sang or recorded. Over There, That's Frank. You know, and that was the one song of his that I still feel like I did it from justice the best I could do, and I'm proud of my version of it. But his recording of that song and the picture of his life that it paints, it's just like you say, man, that could be anybody's life in any small town, any big town. Because you don't have to be in a one-horse town to play or sing country music. Hank Williams was from Montgomery, Alabama. He's not from, you know, middle of nowhere. You know, I mean, he really learned how to play country music on the street, like in town, you know. But that Over There, That's Frank. I mean, you could not outright that song. You might hope to get something in that spirit, but it can't be outwritten. It can't be outwritten. It can't be outsang. It really can't. It can't be. You know, and I would argue he's got that going on throughout the catalog, man. You know, I could start again and pick 10 different ones, you know, and do those. And that's my hope is that people will. I hope that, you know, I've built a big enough audience kind of platform that my tribute record to him will put a lot more people on to James, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well,
I think whether I'm doing it or not, I think, you know, it just the kind of cream rises, but I'm hoping that it's something that really gets a lot of the country music community, the independent country, Americana, you know, commercial country, honestly. You know, I mean, if these people are going to play some of these independent country cats that I know, because I'm just I'm way outsider, Thomas, you know, and I don't think a lot of the stuff that's being called, you know, the second coming of country music, I actually don't think that stuff's really that good, to be honest with you. You know, and I'm saying I got plenty of stuff that's not at the level it should be either, you know, but I'm looking at James, you know, I'm looking at Willie and George and Charley Pride and all these people and trying to, you know, get to that place, you know, and I think that's why I was so taken in with old Slim, man, with James Hand, because there just really was nobody like him, you know, and that I saw anywhere, you know. Nobody could. He really kind of was in his own I mean, he's in his own place. I mean, I don't even know why the hell Willie Nelson would have even bothered calling him a real deal, which it sounds so simple and basic, but it's like, and I think that's where it all kind of started with me when I'm looking at that and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? Like, and did Willie really say that, And then it just kind of, and that's what I said. Like, I didn't go looking for him. Like, all of a sudden he was that guy on stage at the Horse, and I didn't realize they were the same guy. And then later I did, and like I said, Brendan Lee was similar to that. First time I saw her play with the band, same thing. I was looking around and I was like, is anybody else in here? Like, seeing this,
Right.
And, that's Austin, that's the Austin thing, with that. I do a lot of business out of Nashville, and I do love Nashville and its music, and I love spending a night or two there when we're passing through, touring, and going to the Palace, going to Roberts, and seeing some really great, amazing stuff there. But I'll go to my grave that's the wrong side of Mississippi, and it's all in Texas.
This episode of New Slang is brought to you by Hot Damn Coffee. Rolling in from the hills of eastern Tennessee is Hot Damn Coffee. It's a down-home company that roasts single-origin, high-quality coffees from around the world. Their year-round roasts come from certified farms in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Nicaragua. Check out the Hot Damn website over at hotdamn.coffee. There you can find more info on their operation and roasting process and some helpful tips on how to brew the best cup of coffee. They've certainly made my mornings that much better. And to be perfectly honest, I enjoy a nice cup of coffee at all hours of the day. Some of my favorites have been the Tanzanian pea berry in medium roast and the medium roast of Nicaraguan with the honey process. While there, check out their Hot Damn Coffee Club, which is a monthly subscription service. With the holiday season coming upon us, it's just really kind of the perfect gift. I don't care how difficult or easy a person is to shop for, they'll always be good with items like high quality coffee. And of course, right now, if you throw in the promo code SLANG in all caps, that's SLANG, you'll get 20% off your order. And if you're signing up for the Coffee Club subscription service, they'll take 20% off that first month and also throw in a bonus 8-ounce bag of their Nicaraguan coffee. Again, that's SLANG in all caps. Head over to hotdamn.coffee and sign up today. All right, let's get back to the episode.
No, I hear you, man. Man, that Brendan Lee record, the one that she just put out last year, what I love so much about that is when I talked with her I guess it was on the podcast, so listeners, go listen to that after listen to this one. That one, what I love so much about her songwriting on there is like, she writes for her homeland right there, specifically that patch of earth. And I've never been to Minnesota, but there's so many things that you can just tap into that you feel that is just kind of you just feel it. Like, even me being from Fort Stockton, I know some of those same little things that she's talking about. And that song specifically, Prairie Funeral, is just, man, that is, I don't know. I think like that's one of my favorite songs I've ever heard her sing.
Well, I think it's important to, I mean, not that she wasn't doing that before, but, for me and how I, it's like you, write about where you from,
Mm-hmm.
Especially in country music, or blues, folk music. And I think that can, embracing that and putting that forward in front of people is just, as a roots artist, I think it's when you're your most powerful, kind of bring it all back around, and I know that Brennan didn't record a record for a long time, always writing, but didn't put a record out for a long time. And obviously you see me, I put him out a little too fast, but I'd like to put him out. well, I'd like to put him out even faster, to be honest with you, you know, and that's, you know, with James too, you know, I think about his thing, you know, like, cause he's got a record that's pretty hard to find, Evil Things. Like he, you know, Dave Biller ended up producing that, and I've heard a lot of interesting stuff about how that went. And, you know, James came in there and, you know, after like sending through the songs and was like, I don't want to do any of those songs. And I'm not a country singer. I don't do country, you know? And they were like, what the hell are you talking about? You are country music, you know? And I guess he was in this weird place, you know? And so he didn't like that record or didn't want to hear it, but I've gotten a copy of it through Jay Moeller, and it's so good, especially that song Evil Things. And well, that's the other thing I was going to say. I mean, we named all these people. He got a lot of that Lefty Frizzell sound in him too.
Yeah,
James and stuff. But you know, I mean, it's just a while. You know, I mean, he lived right there where he was born. You know, pretty much his whole life. You know, I mean, he'd been a lot of places, but he kind of lived right there. You know, and they're. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah. Well, one of the questions I have written down here that, I feel like it's connected, but it's not like necessarily about the songwriting. It's more about the performance side. Is, you know, obviously you can see a lot of that. You guys tapped into a lot of the heartache and the heartbreak and the honky-tonk feeling and all of that essence of the same thing that was happening. But you mentioned a little bit earlier how, you know, he had that suit and, like, you know, the dress up aspect, you know, the, you know, being dressed up nice for a show. And, obviously, man, you tap into a lot of that stuff. Was that like, and obviously a lot of old time country singers, they would always have like the nice, cool suits and the hats. And, I'm sure like there's part of that where you've seen, there's a ambulance driving by. I'll cut that little bit out. I don't know if you heard it, but, yeah. Well, what is, like, obviously, like, you know, you see a guy like that dressed up playing these honky-tonk songs. Was that like another little aspect of the inspiration, the influence, knowing that, you know, you got to dress up a little bit too?
Well, you know, I know there's this movement in country music to like really, I don't know, there's this blue collar thing where these guys got to wear jeans, you know, and snapback hats, you know, and and that's like some kind of identity, you know, to prove that you're an everyman or something. You know, but that doesn't have anything to do with it, you know, and it really doesn't. And it definitely isn't the tradition of country music, actually, especially not poor folks that rose out of difficult situations to become performers in front of an American audience, whether you're talking about the Carter family, Jimmy Rogers, anybody from, you know, Ray Charles and, you know, Willie Nelson, Hank Williams, any of these guys, you know, the outlaw movement really kind of changed that. You know, I mean, I guess, you know, I understand people, you know, Willie kind of went that other direction, and Waylon and them too. But even those guys, like, that's built on, you know, the stuff that they did in the Hank Williams era. You know, it's built on decades of, you know, Willie being the clean shaven, you know, guy that wrote all those songs and stuff, which I'm not saying he needed to stay that way. But I am saying that, like, you don't just get the Willie and Waylon outlaw era, you know, out of thin air. You know, those guys didn't just, you know, step off, you know, the farm in West Texas, you know, outlaw hippies in the mid 70s, you know?
Right.
And people just kind of, like I say, some people just kind of skip those steps, you know, now. And it's like, well, I like the outlaw thing, and this is what I'm going to do, and all that stuff. And it's like, well, I understand the sentiment and the viewpoint of that, and the kind of rebellious nature of that. It's just, I always kind of look at it being like, most of those folks don't seem to even recognize, you know, the 15 years with those guys prior to that, you know, 15, 20 years, you know, and, you know, and not to go on to that stuff too much longer, but like for me, I started dressing up, Thomas, in the street, you know, to differentiate myself from, you know, the kind of gutter punks and jug band kids and stuff whose like entire identity was like how rough they could look, you know, or just, you know, everything was built on, well, we're going to ride these freight trains till we die, or so they think, you know. Some of them do ride them till they die, and that death is earlier than you'd think. But, you know, I started putting on suits in the street from the Salvation Army to present myself in a way that people would take serious, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, that wasn't something that I spent, even now, I don't spend all my time dealing with all of that. You know, to be honest with you, it ain't hard. I don't have a hard time looking good. It's not hard to put on. It's not hard for me to put on a Western suit. You know, it's not hard for me to put on some slacks and wear some nice boots and a crisp, clean crease hat for the folks coming to the shows. You know, it doesn't take any more effort for the most part than maybe just as much effort as some of these people are putting into making sure they look blue collar enough, you know, and I'm serious.
Yeah.
You know, and I think something about James that really stood out, photos of him throughout the years and the shows he played with us to the end and everything, is like, James always looked good, man, you know, and there's really something to be said about somebody that cleans themselves up like that, especially when they're the realest, you know, most authentic, the genuine article, man. And that's where I got that I really just kind of developed that in the street, and then later realized, you know, oh, well, this is what they, you know, Hank Williams did the same thing, you know, or even like somebody like Lightning Hopkins. I mean, you know, he was him and Mance Lipscomb and those guys, you know, or all the early, you know, blues queens, Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, all those people, you know, I mean, they dressed up almost unbelievable in their like kind of gaudiness, but those people were carrying so much feeling and raw blues power and authenticity that I think that I think that even further elevated the power of their message, you know, when performing, you know?
Right. Yeah. Go look back at any of the guys and the women coming out of the Mississippi Delta, all those guys, and they're from the country. They're from rural areas, and you know, you go look at their hands. Their hands are going to be that callous blue collar work, but almost all of them, all the photos, and granted, part of it is back then you dressed up for photos, but like they wore suits and they wore their, you know, the Sunday best when performing, because like that's part of the deal. And you can see that in a lot of the, you know, the East Texas blues people, and like any of them that went up to Chicago, they're all in suits. Mm-hmm. And like that obviously coincided with a lot of the early country guys too.
Want to break one more time to talk about our pals over at Desert Door and offer a handful of my favorite go-tos. By no means am I an experienced mixologist or bartender or anything like that, but these have been super easy to make and great ways to unwind in the evening. Let's start off by upping your ranch water game a little bit by subbing Desert Door in. I'm a simple man. I just kind of take a Topo Chico, take a couple of drinks out, add some Desert Door, and top it off with a few lime wedges. I'm actually pretty big on the Palomas now too. What I'll do is take some Desert Door, some grapefruit juice, a dash of agave nectar, and some fresh lime juice. And I'm kind of big on lime, so I'll throw in another wedge or two when I pour it over some ice. And actually, I'll do the exact same thing, but I'll substitute some pineapple for the grapefruit for a change up. And now that the weather is dipping down, I've started having a desert door version of a hot toddy. Put some door and some honey together and give it a mix. Add in an Earl Grey tea bag with some boiling hot water. Let it just sit for a minute. Remember, patience is a virtue. And then, of course, I'll squeeze in a little bit of lemon just to have that balance. Anyway, desert door, it's as versatile as vodka and more refined, smooth, and complex than tequila. It's rich and balanced, so whatever your go-to is, it'll do the trick. For more info on Desert Door, check the show notes. All right, back to the episode.
Yeah, the country men and women, you know, everybody really, because it really is like, you know, hillbilly music was not taken seriously, you know, blues music was largely not taken seriously, you know, racial, gender, economic issues, all of these things, you know.
Right.
It's not like a wealthy white person is not gonna, you know, is not gonna necessarily be, you know, give the benefit of the doubt to a poor white street player necessarily, you know. You know what I'm saying? This stuff's not just racial or gender or anything. It's also about like poor folks and like polite society and presentation. Now, a lot of those things have changed. Obviously they've changed, you know, they really changed a lot, but, you know, for me, it's just a simple situation, you know, where it's like, you know, you look good, you know, you feel good, you play good, you know?
Yeah. That's like a Pat Riley thing too. Lakers always looked real cool back in the 80s. You know,
yeah,
like
exactly, man. That's cool. You know, not everybody did that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess like last time you put out a record, Welcome to Hard Times, you know, we didn't talk really about it. And so I was going to ask you a few questions at the end here about that.
Sure, man.
Like, you know, if you look at like your catalog of songs, I think you can obviously see a lot of the honky-tonk stuff, the influence, the inspiration of those old country songs. It feels all in this record, though, you have a little bit more of that Western tinge. You know, you mentioned recording some of those music videos out in California, and you feel that Western, that just like that, the distance, I feel. You know, I think a lot of the photography that you've shown off in those music videos, you know, it's the, you're off in the distance. And, of course, like you hear a lot of that in like a song like Run Horse Run or something like that. What was, I guess, like, was that like something that you wanted to tap into, some more of that Western side of country?
Yeah. You know, I spent a lot of my time in the West, you know, and I mean, you know, West Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Eastern Sierras of California, the California coast, and all of that. And just in the storytelling of, you know, I guess, you know, when really, you know, I started calling this sound really golf and Western, you know, in the last few years. And we were somewhere touring, and I always have like the movie channels on the bus, and Mario Valdez, drummer in my band, like a movie had ended, and he was like, look at that right there. It says golf and Western. And I looked up, you know, and it's the Paramount Pictures, you know, movie image at the end of the front of the film, you know, and it's got the big Western mountain peak, you know, snow-capped peak, and then like with the stars around it, and then below it says Golf and Western Company. And Mayo was like, "That's you. Look at that. That's you." And I thought, man, you know, when you say country, you know, or I used to call it Gulf Coast Boogie Woogie, you know, or you know, these kind of different names that we've been coming up with, country soul and all this kind of stuff. You know, not a lot of people understand what that means, And I just kind of thought about, with my mixing of kind of rhythm and blues music and country music, that really another way to say it is really kind of Gulf and Western, being from the Gulf Coast of Texas and kind of having that, New Orleans sound, that Texas Gulf Coast sound, that Freddie Fender kind of swamp thing, that just kind of part of who I am and my kind of education as a itinerant musician. And then, growing more into country and Western music through the barroom songs, the storytelling of country music is what I really like, and I had always been really into Bob Dylan and Ramblin' Jack and Woody Guthrie, and the idea of the West,
Mm-hmm.
I never really was. I did play on the street in New York City. I did that for years. And I think the reason that I went to New York City was just because I knew that was, kind of the pinnacle of kind of Western society in terms of a big city. And I wanted to test my grit against a place so big, that you recognize it's got this heartbeat, that it's going to go on with or without you. And, once I kind of discovered what I was looking for there, to be honest with you, besides playing shows, I had no interest really in being there, and I have really always been drawn to the west side of the nation, the west side of Mississippi and the landscape. I just always have been, that's why I was in California working on farms when I was younger, or always hoboing through Colorado, or, here in northern New Mexico where me and Taylor are right now and stuff. It speaks to me, and so in that way, I feel like I'm making, very Western music from, first-hand experience of folk tradition, and finding my voice, kind of in the West. And so with Welcome to Hard Times, that is shot, in the Eastern Sierras in Colorado, northern New Mexico. That whole place, actually, a lot of that Welcome to Hard Times video is all shot in the Eastern Sierras. And the interesting thing about that is that that's where almost all the California Westerns were shot, like 300 of them, because you could drive up from LA into Inyo County. It wasn't too far away, where you got the Alabama hills, and then the eastern side of the Sierras looked like the damn Himalayas almost. And I thought in a way how cool it would be to touch in on that, use that same landscape, to tell this story, Welcome to Hard Times is the title of a book that was turned into a film, a Western that Henry Fonda starred in the late 60s. And I had seen it on one of those channels that I watched, Stars Encore Westerns or something. And they're in this town that looks a lot like that area. And there's this kind of, evil bad man that kind of almost in a dark comedy, you can't understand why the entire town is unable to stop him when any one of them could just shoot this guy in the back, and they won't do it. They're just too afraid of him, he's just dominating them. And the name of the town is Hard Times. And so that's why it's called Welcome to Hard Times. And I ended up turning that into that song. And then because of the kind of cultural issues of 2020, it went from maybe maybe a smart kind of 1960s Western sounding kind of Willie Nelson song to really having a higher meaning, I think, plugging into the times, that ended up being the big single on the record, which I think in another year, in an ordinary year, I think it still might have connected with people, but obviously that they would have tried to push what they thought were more commercial sounding songs on that album. And they did. I just put my foot down, and with the timing of things going on in America, everybody kind of came around to my point of view, which doesn't always happen. And, you know, it became the far and away, you know, hit for me on a record, if there's such a thing at my level. And
yeah,
I have to say, you know, Gulf and Western is the best way that I've been able to describe, you know, my sound.
yeah.
So
Yeah, this record right here, that Western, you've always had a little bit of this crispness, but like on this right here, a lot of these songs you do feel a lot of that Western air, just like that fresh, that refreshing crispness where, you know, it's jacket weather, but it's not like having to wear you know, a coat kind of thing. It's in the 60s. You feel like that fresh air that you mentioned, like how outside of LA where they filmed all those Westerns. Another place is like that out in Utah where like all those James Ford movies were done, you know, like Stagecoach and stuff like, and it's just like that desert.
Oh, the John Ford Western.
Yeah. John Ford. Yeah. And it's all just that openness, you know, and I think you can feel like that being kind of a backdrop for a lot of these songs. So,
yeah, the Fool Somebody Else, half of that's filmed in Utah, actually, and then the other half is like in Death Valley.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were going for that, man. I mean, Mark Neal, who produced it and recorded it in South Georgia at his studios there in Valdosta, he really heard my songs. And actually, I wrote most of that record in Northern California and also in West Texas out in the Chihuahua Desert. The song Poplar Tree, I literally wrote out in the white sands outside of Del City there on the west side of the Guadalupe there in the Yuccas.
Yeah.
And I wrote most of that, in West Texas and Northern California. But he heard those songs and was really was touching in on the gunfighter ballad stuff from Marty Robbins, Jimmy Dean sound, Willie Nelson's and Then I Wrote sound, that production that he had in the early 60s, you know, really were touching in on that. And, you know, based on the songs that I was writing and where I was at in my life, you know, he really wanted to take it into that very much kind of cinematic, very, very much very cinematic kind of country Western sound that, you know, in the 60s. And then I obviously really ran with that and tied in, you know, just a lot of things of how the West shows up on film in America, you know, and obviously a lot of spaghetti Western aspects in there kind of mixed in. There's a lot of Ennio Morricone going on in there.
Yeah.
And mixed in with the Marty Robbins and then of course there's a touch of the Gulf Coast sound in there.
Yeah.
But
well,
yeah, I'm proud of it, man. I got the follow-up record to that done too. It's already finished, so we're gonna be putting that one out. So James Hand's coming out next month, and then later this year, I've got the follow-up Mark Neal record coming in behind that.
Yeah,
already finished.
That's one of those things where I think that, you know, you've mentioned how like you put out a lot of records. I think that like it's one of those things where the audience, it's no secret that you're going to be releasing 2 records, even though you haven't officially announced these, because like you release one and you automatically know that the next one's coming like 8 months later or something like that. So, yeah, you know, I was going to ask the final in this with this right here, those final 3 or 4 songs on the record, you know, you have like that, Black Jack County Chain. That song right there is just so damn. I've heard you talk a little bit about it, like how, what's the story? Like Willie Nelson cut the song and it just kind of was going up the charts, but then like they kind of stomped that out because of the content of that song.
Yeah, that's the story roughly. You know, the other part of that story is like Red Lane had written it and pitched it to Charley Pride, and you know, Charley was obviously in a unique situation. Singing country music is really kind of the only Black artist with a major platform in country music. Really, you could argue in history.
Right.
And so that was a weird time for, and then it's kind of interesting that, obviously you could see why he passed it up, and in my opinion. And then Willie, being the type of guy that he was, really picked it up. And then, they just banned it from the charts right as he kind of entered the top 20. But that song, I guess, is specifically supposed to be about like a black chain gang in Georgia. But nothing in that song actually mentions any region besides this kind of ficticious county, Blackjack County. Unless there is a Blackjack County that I don't know about. There might be, probably is. But I liked the song because I felt that the chain gang aspect, or the kind of false, imprisonment, is something that is very much a country music element, a blues, a very folk American element, like the murder ballad, the murder ballad and the chain gang prison work stuff that, that can be touchy along racial lines. But what I've noticed is that all people from all backgrounds, men from all backgrounds, relate to those stories in places where maybe they wouldn't agree with each other on other issues. It kind of be universally drawn to them, and you can apply your struggle to a song like that, which is why I really liked it so much. And the story, that's kind of amazing about it, really, as dark a song as it is, this man on this chain gang, he wins, he won. He was falsely imprisoned on the side of the road to be taken advantage of for essentially slave labor, by a corrupt, evil sheriff. And they managed to kill this man and escape. And he's singing in freedom. It's kind of amazing, That's why I really liked it, And you can apply all of the, socioeconomic, political, kind of racial stuff to it, but I think it kind of cuts across all those lines. And that's what I really like about that damn song. So
yeah. Well, you obviously those final three songs, you sequence a record for reasons, but I don't know, I don't know if it's just because hearing them all in a row, like that Blackjack County chain, the Man That Time Forgot, and the Popular Tree. For me, I don't know, I don't know if it's just because I've listened to that record 100 times, but I don't know, those three stories, I feel like they're all these different chapters of the same guy. I don't know.
Yeah. They are, that one and Paint It Blue and yeah. I mean, it's really kind of it really is a concept record, and the sequencing, it kind of really is this, the whole record is sequenced in that way. It begins with Welcome to Hard Times, welcome, here are hard times. And then by the end of the record, you realize that the guy telling you all these stories, is talking to you from the grave,
Mm-hmm.
And we thought that out, and Mark really listened to the songs initially and thought, man, this is a concept record. This is, and that's why it's so cinematic and has where it goes. So you definitely touching in on that with the last three songs, but especially those last three songs. But it really is kind of a start to finish, Welcome to Hard Times. And then by the end, it's you've crossed all these rivers and faced all these great battles, and you realize that this guy's already gone, and then it's kind of something to contemplate, is well, if that's where the road is going to always lead, then you better, you gotta really live, and that's kind of part of it, it's kind of listen to that kind of concept of you've got to overcome your fear of death, I guess. And I don't know, I just like that stuff. You know, I really love Westerns, and I love the stories, you know, and I just love the stories and the revenge narratives and the adventure and the like distance that's covered and time and like actual land travel, you know, and the openness of the concept of the West that really to me kind of starts, you know, once you know, it kind of really starts on the west side of Austin and Fort Worth and those places, and the West begins, you know. But that's another conversation. Thomas, man, it's been good talking to you. I gotta take my lady to town. She's wondering what the hell is taking me so long.
I was about to tell you, like, it's always good talking with you, man. And yeah, hopefully
it's a pleasure, man. Always.
Hopefully we'll see each other down the line at a show here in Lubbock somewhere. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure we're gonna be doing Lubbock this summer. So let's
awesome.
Whenever we come to town, come by and let's talk, man.
Yeah, sounds good.
It's man. Always really a pleasure speaking with you, brother. I wish it was like this every time.
I hear you. So, all right, man. You have a good one. I'll see you, man.
You too, brother. Bye.
All right, that is it for this week. Huge thanks to Charley for coming on again and talking about his new record, 10 for Slim. Y'all be sure to check it out. Be sure to stop on over at the Patreon, the merch store, for all that new merch. Check out our presenting partners over at Desert Door, Wild Gallery, The Blue Light Live, and Hot Damn Coffee. And yeah, I'll see y'all next week for a couple of more episodes.